Okay, so now we're recording. Good morning. Let me just get this started. Okay, so the webinar today is about getting the Scrum Master to be full-time, and particularly how to do it. We talked last time, and you can see that webinar or listen to it on YouTube and otherwise. But we talked last time about why it was important for the Scrum Master to be full-time. We'll discuss that a little bit today. But the key thing today is some issues around how do we get the Scrum Master to be full-time and then be successful with that. Okay. So as I was saying, the last time we talked about when the Scrum Master should be full-time. And our short answer was usually in a professional situation, you might say. Now, assuming you agree with that, or at least assuming that we want that to happen sometimes, how do we get that to happen? And of course, the usual problem is we've got to convince the manager or managers to go full-time. Sometimes you have to convince other colleagues, the person involved, whatever. But we're going to use the general case of the manager. Probably the same arguments, no matter who you're trying to convince or who you're trying to change, get to accept the idea. Okay, so here's our agenda a little bit for today for the half an hour. We're only going to take a half an hour this time. The key issue is how to get the Scrum Master to be full-time. But then how did we get here? So I do want to go back a little bit and say, why do we have this problem to begin with? There's certainly an argument that we shouldn't have had this problem. And then how do we make the change happen? And then some issues around that, as I kind of alluded to before. I just want to mention that the next webinar in about a month, I think I have the date later in the slide deck. We're going to do a webinar on having dedicated and stable teams, which obviously more broadly is in some ways the same topic. But certainly we're going to talk more about why both dedicated and stable is important. But anyway, that's for the next webinar next month. Okay, so why do we have this problem? I've got 7 answers here. I'm not sure that you would agree with all of them. You may have other answers. But one answer I have is we haven't done training well enough. In some way, it's insufficient, and we didn't clarify that. We didn't explain the whole issue. Then the next one is we didn't clarify that it should be full-time. Why is the Scrum Guide not clear enough on this? Well, one answer is that they want it to be open, and they've only got 18 pages, and so they can't discuss every issue. But it is clear, I think, that Jeff Sullivan would like to have the Scrum Master normally, or at least often, full-time. He's certainly going to accept that you're doing Scrum if it's not full-time. Okay, anyway, we didn't clarify the full-time. We don't see the value of it. The right people haven't seen the value of being dedicated enough. I think it's there, but they haven't seen it or even thought about it much. And so they think of the Scrum Master a certain way. They've got to train people. They've got to facilitate meetings. And if they only are really facilitating meetings, why do they need to be full-time? So I don't think the Scrum Master role has been understood in that way. But anyway, they don't see the value. We've, I think, given people too wide a license to innovate on the process. And so they're feeling free to do anything they want. Without really understanding what Scrum, what Agile is all about. Anyway, that's a possible reason. So I do think this is a very common problem. But anyway, I think I've got a typo there. I don't think 5 should be really number 5. It should be kind of the conclusion. So particularly the managers don't see the value of it. So we've got to explain the value to the managers. And another key reason is the Agilists are timid about velocity. Some of them don't really support the velocity concept, the whole idea of doing story points and so forth. And perhaps they haven't implemented velocity very well. But in any event, they're not strong about velocity. If you don't understand the concept of velocity, to me, it's hard to really justify having a full-time Scrum Master. Okay, so then how do we fix it? So I'm going to give you several different reasons. Most of these slides are specific reasons. Sometimes they're follow-ups to the slide before. So we need to explain what it means to be full-time. So just by explaining, I think we can get somewhere. And I think we have tried to do this, but we haven't done it as well as we might have done. Okay, so so to me, I'm assuming a normal situation, so we have to explain that. A team of about 7. I can't hear you. Say again. Oh, the slide should be moving for you to slide.
We're on the first one.
You're on the first slide. I'm on slide 6.
Yeah. We're getting the Scrum Master full time. How?
Yes, and you're on the title page. Why are the slides not moving? Let me stop the share and then restart it. And I may have to do this every time. I have no idea why it's not moving. Okay, so I'll stop the share. Then what I got to do? I've got to do this. Then I come back and I start the share screen. Then I go to okay. I go to here, and maybe there's another window here. Okay, so let me get rid of that, and then maybe this helps. Maybe it helps. So then I share with that one. Share screen. Okay, then I share this one. Then I hit share. Maybe that works better. Okay, so then I go to, this is, oh, that's the wrong one. Share screen. Sorry about this. Okay, now, is it there? Let me go back. Then I share screen again. Okay, now we should be, I hope, better. Okay, so we've got this one. Do you see this one now? Okay, so I can see what Kathy is in the same room with me, so I can see what she sees. So you can see it. It's slide 6. Okay, so I'm assuming the normal situation should be, at least, that we have a team of about 7. We have a relatively stable team. We are playing and want to play professionally. That is to say, what we're, the mission is important, for example, and for other reasons we want to play professionally. We do want to get better, and the company is willing to change. We want to win, and that we can find a decent Scrum Master. And I think normally we can find one. They may not be, they may not be the Tom Brady of Scrum Masters yet, but we often can find usually can find a decent Scrum Master. Okay, now I'm going to switch. Aha, good. So it switched slides to number 7. So note, you do have to have a specific person in mind, I think, if you're going to do some of these things I'm going to suggest later. For example, even to explain. So if you're explaining to a manager and you're working with a Scrum Master who's really kind of, very new, below average, that kind of thing, it may make it harder to explain. When they start to see a good Scrum Master doing the job in a real way, just a second, let me make sure that we don't have additional participants who need to get in. How are we doing? Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry. Hi, everybody. We've already started. So if we have additional participants that need to get in, excuse me, if we don't have a good Scrum Master, then we're going to have a bit of a problem. And by good, I mean that they can accomplish the following goal, which is somewhat aggressive, but I think quite doable with a pretty good Scrum Master. Take a normal team, double the velocity in 6 months or so, even a year would be quite compelling compared to what we're usually doing. At the same time, increase the happiness. At the same time, reduce the hours for the team. I'm assuming it's very common for us to be working too hard. Maybe not true for every organization. Increase the quality, not let it decrease. That's not really increasing the velocity. And increase the typical ratio of business value points to story points, or at least business value as we conceive it at our place, compared to the amount of work. And then at the end of the 6 months or so, the people in the team say, I never want to leave this team. This is the best 6 months of my life ever. So we want somebody who can do that. And I'm not sure that everybody can or even wants to do that. I do think it's tough to make change happen, but they are somewhat adept at making change happen. Okay, I do think we need to be, we, as in discussing this, need to be honest with the person we're discussing it with, the manager, for example. So this is not going to be done solely by the Scrum Master. Other things have to be in place. The team must identify good impediments. The manager must support by saying yes to certain things. The team will need some money to fix things, and I'm suggesting roughly 20% of the cost of the team as a budget for that. The organization needs to be willing to change, and then all these things need to happen reasonably well for the Scrum Master to be successful. You may have to work to convince people to make these happen, but these need to be happening at some point. So just explaining might work. The reason it might work is we haven't done it very well before. We may have done it, but we haven't done it very well. So I think it's worth a try. Okay, next, how do we explain the value? So this is one slide to very quickly explain the value. So imagine this is over a year. So certainly I think the Scrum Master is valuable. So in a year, fix the impediments if we increase the velocity over a year, not 6 months, by 100%. What happens? I'm assuming that the basic productivity of the team already is roughly, we invest $1 million, we get $3 million back over the next 3 to 5 years on average with the work we do. So if we do that and we increase the velocity by 100%, then we double that value. That is to say, we have another $3 million. It's as though we had a second team for free. And so that individual team is delivering also perhaps very valuable, twice as fast, at least on average, not every sprint, not every month, but typically twice as fast. That also is valuable in a different way. And this should be more fun, more something that the team can take pride in because they're not working harder, they're working smarter. So this is quite key. If you talk to the team and you say, I want you to work harder, they're not going to be up for it. Whereas if you say we want to work smarter, we want to be more proud of delivering more to the customers, then they might, then they'll be into it and find it fun actually. Okay, so we need to put this in the context that the key purpose of Scrum is to be hyper-productive. That is to say, ultimately 5 to 10 times more productive than we have been in the past. And teams can do this. Are we regularly doing this with Scrum? The answer is clearly no. But many teams are increasing by more than 100%. I didn't say many percentage-wise, but still many. We have to be in, this isn't going to happen if we're not trying to improve and improve somewhat aggressively. So we may or may not achieve this at first in our organizations. Some organizations, I'm sympathetic with many of you, they're hard to change. It's almost as if they are insistent that we will not change. In other words, they resist change. So from my point of view, at least at first, I don't mind that that we, not particularly you, I'm not trying to pick on any one of you individually, but we as a group of Agile advocates, let's say, I don't mind that we fail at doing this, at getting 100%. What I do mind, though, is we're not trying sufficiently cleverly. I was going to say hard, but hard is not the real thing. We're not trying, and we're not trying in a clever way to make this happen. Okay, next. Other conditions that are required. The Scrum Master, as we said before, needs to be a decent Scrum Master. And get help from others. They need to be good at, or reasonably decent at working on certain impediments. Nobody's good at all the different kinds of impediments, and there's a wide range of them. So they need to also elicit or obtain the help of other people to work on those other kinds of impediments. They need to work on impediments like user stories pretty much one at a time in priority order. Which means that they typically should, but often don't, put the impediments in a priority order and then work on them in that order, usually in terms of return on investment, you might say benefit over cost. Again, I already mentioned impediments need to be defined broadly as really any opportunity for improvement. So often they're defined, in some cases, even this narrowly, that they're only the blockers to the specific stories. They're causing a full stop to a specific story. Those indeed are impediments, but they are not the only kind of impediment. Really, anything in the organization that could help us be more productive or in the environment that if changed, mitigated, improved, that could help us be more productive. Any of those things should be thought of as an impediment, or the lack of fixing them is the impediment. So that's a much broader definition of impediment. Okay, another good argument that we can make with the managers. Stephen Covey, as probably all of you know, Stephen Covey wrote a book on the 7 habits of highly successful people. I believe that's the name of it exactly. Probably should have mentioned the title and reminded myself. But Covey's famous book on the 7 habits. Anyway, almost all managers would agree that we should improve continuously. I suppose that there's some that might not agree with that, but I think most managers would. So then you ask them, does that mean we should improve every sprint? And of course, they're likely to say yes. Then you ask them, what percentage of our time as a whole Scrum team should we devote to improving? I ask this often in my classes, and the common answers I get are sometimes greater than this, but 25%, 33%, something like that, often 50%. I don't really agree with 50%. But people give answers like that, and I think you might get answers like that from managers. What we're suggesting really is 14%, essentially 14%. Really, to be fair, more like 20%. How do I get to 14%? 1 divided by 7 is 0.1429. That's about 14%. And how do I get the 1 divided by 7? That's one's full-time Scrum Master working on improving inside a team of 7. To me, it's a hard argument for them to refuse. Okay, another. I'm sorry. The point in Covey's book is his. I'm not sure which chapter, but he's discussing the 7th habit. The chapter is called "Sharpening the Saw," and of course, the 7th habit is continuous improvement. If they don't have the book, if they don't know the book, give them the book and give them some time to read it, and then have this discussion. Okay, another way of talking about this with some managers, particularly managers that are into sports, would be to compare to another great team. My example on this particular slide is the Kansas City Chiefs, who just won the Super Bowl, as many of you know quite well. So pick the right team for the right manager, or the right sport for the right manager. And if your manager's not into sports at all, this maybe won't work. You may have to find a different kind of team. But about in this case, Kansas City Chiefs, did they improve? Do they improve? And do they more or less improve every day, every week, between games, and then over the course of the season, and then between seasons? And the answer is always yes. Is everyone, including all the helper types, is everyone full-time, totally dedicated to the Kansas City Chiefs? Well, you have some minor exceptions, but essentially all the players are working for and all the coaches and assistants are working for one and only one team. Yes, they're doing in their private time, so to speak, advertising and things like that, particularly the famous ones. But they're pretty much working full-time. Do they have full-time coaches? Yes, and many of them. What's the ratio? I don't really know in professional football. I know in college basketball, the ratio is much higher in terms of coaches than you might expect. And do those people, in effect, fix, and the coaches and the support staff, do they, in effect, fix impediments? I think the analogy is quite apt and more or less direct. And does the help of these 9 players help the players win? And the answer is yes, I think. And then some of you know Andy Reid is the coach of the Kansas City Chiefs, and he gets paid a lot of money. I'm not sure how many millions. I'm going to guess 2, 3, maybe even more. Some of you may know, but a lot of money. In other words, that coach, that Scrum Master, is very valuable. And often they'll go like, well, they'll be willing to do the next idea. So the next idea is ask them to do an experiment. Let's say you have, I don't know, some number of teams at your company. You have 10 teams. It doesn't really make that much difference, except that you need to have more than one. If you're doing one, it's not quite the same kind of experiment. But you take one team. First thing to say is managers can't resist doing this, really. We're going to try one thing briefly, and then you have to argue about how long is briefly. We're going to try one idea briefly, and we're going to try to help ourselves improve in this way. This is really hard for the managers to resist this idea. Okay, so you say, let's try having a full-time Scrum Master and see how much it helps, measure how much it helps. Okay, so what do you need? You need a good Scrum Master. You need to identify some good impediments. obviously you need to get some of those impediments fixed and then measure something. I'm recommending the change in velocity. And then I think also you need to assure that the team is also, at the same time that they're increasing the velocity, they're happier. Again, we're working smarter, not harder. There's more to happiness than that, but they shouldn't feel like they're being ground down by working all these extra hours. That's not the way we're increasing the velocity. We're increasing the velocity by removing the impediments. So once you have that successful experiment, and you have to argue how long, it may take more than a month, it may take 3 months, whatever, but give it some reasonable amount of time in your place. Do try to make sure that it's likely to be successful. That is to say, you've got a good Scrum Master, particularly, in a pretty good situation where change can't happen. And once the experiment works, then they're likely to say, okay, let's try it with the next team, with the next team, with the next team. This is an approach that Taiichi Ohno particularly recommends. Taiichi Ohno, to me, is a very, or at least should be, much more famous than he is. He's the key guy behind the whole thing that we call now Lean. He pretty much invented it all starting in the late 1940s at Toyota, where they switched from a sewing machine company to an automobile company. And he started at that time to invent this stuff that we later called the Toyota Way, Lean, all this kind of Toyota production system, all these other names. And he worked for decades to change Toyota. And I think he would say, as a change agent, that he wasn't finished changing Toyota and the culture of Toyota sufficiently yet. He wasn't done, but he had to retire. He was starting to be an old man by the 1980s. So he worked through the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and well into the 80s in terms of changing Toyota. And this was his favorite approach to changing them. Let's try an experiment and see if it works. And let's use the facts to justify the experiment. So I think he had a good idea, and you might want to use it. Okay, another idea. I sent a message over to Jim Highsmith, and he says Ron Jeffries actually said this. But you've heard the Nike slogan, right? Just do it. So sorry, there's a typo there with the extra quotation mark, or the lack of a quotation mark. So anyway, just do it. The quote there, just do it. They, the managers, don't know what you're doing. As they say, Jim Highsmith says that Ron Jeffries said that. So you try things, then later, after you've proven that it works for a while without having told anybody, you show the data, and they're likely to be happy because it's going to be successful. So sometimes it's better to not ask for permission up front, but rather to ask for forgiveness later if they happen to find out about things. But try it for a while. I think you're going to find it successful, and then show the managers the data later. They don't tend to argue with success. Some will say, well, you didn't ask me. But this kind of thing, I think they're not going to argue with success, and they're not going to be that upset if you didn't ask them. Okay, one more big idea, and that is to say it has lots of ideas within it, is this idea of fearless change. That is to say, a book that was written some time ago now by Marilyn Manns and Linda Rising. There are out there, and you probably are aware of them, but other books on change. I particularly like this one. I'm in fact going to give a course with Marilyn Manns on this. But anyway, they have another book called More Fearless Change that's come out since then, a couple of years ago now, that's got even more patterns. This is in the patterns movement, which that's a whole other discussion. By the way, these are 48 plus another 15, but 48 key patterns on how to get people and or groups of people, but how to get individuals or groups of people to change. And some of them we've already talked about. I didn't give the pattern name from the book to them, but we've already talked about them in the previous things. But they have a whole bunch more, as you see. So you keep trying these different ideas, and eventually, both for the impediments and for introducing, both on fixing the impediments and on introducing the idea of a full-time Scrum Master, you can use these patterns to influence people. And really, if you're going to be an Agile advocate, you need to become, eventually, a master at influencing change. And it isn't that hard if you study it and if you practice it and make mistakes, but practice it and learn how to do it more and more masterfully. And we call ourselves quickly change agents, but we don't work on becoming better at it. We are never going to have the power to make people change, but we're always have already, and we'll always learn how to use better and better, the power to influence or suggest or reason with people and get them to change, or at least to try to change, and then convince them later that that was a good change for them. Okay, so to me, this is a win. This idea of the full-time Scrum Master is a very winning opportunity to learn, as I called the Zen of change, or whatever you want to call it, to learn how to become a master at change. So I recommend it to you. Okay, so are we all masters of change, or even any of us? Most of us are noobs, as my daughters would say. We're noobs at being change agents, and that's not to put anybody down. That's the way most people are. So when we start to do this, or try to do it regularly and try to do it more and more professionally, we're gonna fail some. Even if we're not very good, you have influenced people already in your life and gotten them to change. But we're gonna try it in a more and more aggressive way, and we're gonna fail some. But failing is a learning experience, and you're not gonna fail all the time. As you fail, you're gonna learn what works, what doesn't work, and you're gonna become in that way by practice and practice and practice better and better at doing it. Okay, I recommend the book. Okay, so let's review the 6. Just explain to them, show them the money. I'm saying $3 million. You could argue with that ratio. We can get a little spreadsheet out and tweak that ratio. Talk about the Covey book and the sharpening the saw idea and the 14%. Talk about a comparison. Just do it yourself and then show the results later, and then get out all those 48 plus 15 patterns and work on those. So those are some ideas about how to make it happen. Okay, so now we talk about some issues. So we'll go through these pretty quickly. I'm sorry we spent more time on technical issues in that part. Be sure to have a good, Scrum Master. Don't have a not good enough Scrum Master. Too new at it, not well trained. There are a bunch of different factors. Typically, the person's not a bad person. They're just not good at that job yet. So I call it the right person, possibly the right team, but they're in the wrong place at the moment. So it's not so much that they won't get there, but they're not there yet. I wouldn't start with that situation. I'd find a better situation. Then if you get success, they're going to want a bunch of Scrum Masters. So at least start to see real soon, do you have a bunch of good Scrum Masters for the multiple teams? So that you can fill those positions once we need them. Okay, how do we develop the good Scrum Masters? Training. I'm a Scrum trainer, so you'd expect I'd say that, but I actually do think it's the right thing to do. But be sure they understand certain concepts, and here's my little list of them. They understand servant leadership. They understand what the goal really is, and that they may not succeed at this goal, but at least they're trying to achieve the goal of 100% improvement in 6 months in terms of velocity. Don't let them try to do it alone. They need to ask for support by different people. We talked about that some. Particularly, they must involve the managers and get the managers to give them a yes to money or people or approval. They should work across many types of impediments, some of which they'll be better at than others. They have to prioritize the impediments, and they should not try to be just an ordinary Scrum Master. A lot of companies have this idea of an ordinary Scrum Master that doesn't really accomplish much in terms of velocity. They definitely should not try to be the ordinary Scrum Master. Okay, so try to leverage what you can. So for example, if you find a really good Scrum Master, try to ask the others. I'm imagining, my example for somewhat personal reasons is Steph Curry. I'm not sure how well he's playing right now in the NBA. He had some injuries and so forth. But imagine Steph Curry is a basketball player if you know basketball. So if you've got somebody that's starting to learn it, say, well, imitate that guy. At least the basics of what that guy's doing. So they imitate the really good Scrum Master. They become better faster. So try to leverage your good Scrum Masters in some way or another. Don't be stuck on the idea that every Scrum Master in every situation must be full-time. Yes, we have a bias that in most professional situations they should be full-time, but don't be stuck by that. That may not be the right thing to do. So be somewhat flexible. Um, you said this several different ways, but identify the best impediments. One of the problems is some of the best impediments are not being put on the table by the right people. Usually the right people are the team. Often they're not putting them on the table, so to speak, because they can't even imagine that thing being changed, being improved. It's been that way for 20 years at this company. So you're going to have to work to get them to identify the best impediments. And then remind them that there are many types of impediments. Pretty much anything that's slowing us down is an impediment. Another key thing is they have to imagine or believe that things might change. So we kind of said that before, but I wanted to emphasize that on that last bullet point. Okay, sometimes the company is unwilling to look at its problems. So you may have to address this. And I'm not sure this is an easy one to address, but you may have to address this issue, at least within the context of the team. The company culture says we don't talk about certain things, but within this room, at least, we're going to give ourselves you might call it the freedom to discuss any kind of problem. And not in a negative or, let's get depressed or let's tear people down way, but more in a way of how can we improve things? With maybe the admission that some things not going to change and can't be improved right now, but then we go to the next one. So anyway, you're going to you may have to address this kind of issue. And often it's key to getting at the best impediments. Not that you won't have some, but getting at the best impediments, you may have to get a greater sense of freedom of discussing anything. Some companies are not, and some Scrum teams are not, tracking velocity. So I think that's going to be key. The real proof to the value of a full-time Scrum Master to me is in the increased velocity. There are other things, the happiness, the morale of the team, the quality, those kinds of things the Scrum Master would have an influence on, but particularly the velocity. The business value per story point, that's more an issue of the Scrum Master getting the product owner to make sure that that happens. One of the key aspects of this is often teams are still way over-promising, and that's actually keeping the velocity lower than it should be. But anyway, the first thing is to track it. Okay, we have a little bit of time. Let's take a little bit of time. If you've got questions that you can put in the chat box, and then maybe unmute yourself. Are there questions you have about what we've said so far? Or does it all make sense to you? No
Can
questions?
you really increase your velocity by 100%?
Yes, yes. And you're not the first one to question that, Kim. And it's where the Scrum community isn't talking about this. This is actually quite easy to do. In part, well, it depends on where your team is coming from. If they've been doing something very Scrum-like for a long time and they've become very, very good and they fixed a lot of impediments without even calling them impediments, I suppose maybe not theoretically, but I've never seen that actual case to be true. Mm-hmm. So sometimes and it isn't only yourself that you've got to convince the team that change is possible. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't see you. I see your face, Kim. So I
Okay.
saw you reacting.
Good.
Because if they don't believe, as I said this earlier, as you may recall, if they don't believe change is possible, they seldom put the best impediments on the table. So they don't have to believe, and even you don't have to believe that you really can change it 100%, particularly in 6 months. But at least you're going to go after changing things aggressively, and at least try to convince yourself to believe that it's possible. And then once you start to get some success, then raise your sights and be, I'll call it more, I don't mean aggressive in a personal way, but aggressive in terms of your goals. Let's say we've increased it 10%. Well, now let's, in the next whatever month or two, let's say in 1 month we can increase it 10%. So for the next month, let's increase it 20%. And maybe you won't succeed at that, but you become more aggressive at trying to improve things. Anyway, it actually happens a lot, except it's not a lot percentage-wise, partly because people don't even see that as the goal of the Scrum Master. I mean, people are trained that way, that's the discussion in the company. They may, the Scrum trainer, I say it every time, but the Scrum Master, the Scrum trainer may or may not have said it, but even if they said it, it's sometimes not remembered a week or two later. And the culture isn't reiterating the idea. The managers, the more experienced Scrum Masters that are in the company aren't reminding you, we're expecting you to change the velocity a lot. So then people ignore it and they don't do much about it, and so it won't happen. But if you keep at it consistently and try to become better and get some help from an Agile coach or a more experienced Scrum Master that's done something like that, then it's definitely possible. It's happened actually quite a lot. And there's a bunch of articles on my website that talk about cases where it happened. I'll give you an example. The best situation, the most impressive situation to me is a company called Systematic. And there's 2 articles on my website about Systematic. By the author is Jeff Sullivan and people from Systematic. A Danish company, they were CMMI 5, level 5, which is the highest. And then they added Scrum and they quadrupled their productivity, their velocity across the whole company of, I think 400 people or so. I think it's about 400. I don't think it's that big a company. Across the whole company, not one team, but across the whole company. It took them 2.5 years to increase that much. But if they can go 4 times across the whole company, then you, with the support of managers and maybe some money, can definitely improve things significantly. I mean, quite significantly. So, have some goals. You may find that you don't quite make them. So if you think that you can do, or start to believe that you can do 100% in 6 months, tell your boss, I'm trying to do 50% in 1 year, which is super impressive to most bosses. And then when you do more than that, they're going to go, whoa. So, once you start to get some confidence, under promise and over deliver as usual. Okay, at least I helped a little bit on that, Kim. You're not the only one that has that concern. Some people think I just flew in from Colorado. I guess that's getting to be an old joke, but whatever. Then I'm smoking some stuff. Any other questions?
Hey, Joe.
Yes, sir.
So here we're developers that have moved into management that are wanting to kind of transition to the Scrum Master role.
Yep.
Do you have any suggestions on how to kind of do less development work ourselves? So, for example, if a production issue comes in, would that still be on the Scrum Master as a impediment that we could remove, or do we just need to basically stop development work?
So let's talk about that. First thing, the Scrum Master has to help get the top impediment fixed, if it's the top impediment. The Scrum Master may or may not be competent at it, but often not just one person, but the whole, if it's a major defect or a system issue or whatever you want to call it, system down issue for customers, more than the Scrum Master should be working on it, maybe even the whole team. Depends on who you are, right? So you're coming from your background, you're able to do some of this stuff, but don't get sucked into doing the job of the team. Let me say that broadly.
Right.
And I think it's very tempting for us to do things that we're familiar with doing, whereas the Scrum Master job we're not that familiar with, it makes us feel uncomfortable. So try to do the Scrum Master job and not do your old job. I mean a lot. So here's one suggestion. Okay, help them, because they're going to ask you, help them a little bit, put a time box on it, maybe a half an hour a day, but that's it. I'll help a half an hour a day on your questions, issues, concerns, but then if I can't get it done in a half an hour, then you guys got to do it. I'll help you a half an hour the next day, but that's all I'm going to do for today. So try to put a time box on it. I'm not saying half an hour is the right amount for the time box every time, but it starts to wean you and them off of the idea that you're going to be sucked into your old job. Because you really need to, make a transition and make it clear to everybody that you have made that transition, not just for yourself, but also for them. I'm sorry, you were going to ask.
I was just going to say, so basically, we need to recognize our new role and not try to fall back into our old positions, I guess.
Yes, and if that takes you a while psychologically, and if it takes them a while, you don't have to go cold turkey, but you've got to eventually make the transition. where you're
Okay.
really a full-time Scrum Master. Now, we could go through a whole bunch of cases. You know, should I be doing this? Should I be doing that? Is that the Scrum Master job? So, and you got a good case. If that's the top impediment, then maybe you've got to get down and roll up your sleeves and actually work on that top impediment. But very commonly,
Right.
they're bringing you a technical issue that's not the top impediment, and you're getting distracted from, so that you're not working on the top impediment. You're working on something less important. If you're really going to be successful, you always need to be working on the top impediment.
Okay.
Okay, and
So basically,
that's your questions can lead to a long discussion, but I think that's a little bit of help.
all right. Okay. I guess the basic takeaway is that we're okay to do it if it's an impediment to help out. But other than that, we should leave the development work to the team.
Well, you can put it on the impediment list, but and you should help if it's the top impediment, but don't get involved if it's lower than that.
Okay.
Give it to somebody else, give it to the team or somebody else. Okay, let me just finish with 2 little questions for you. So I do want to mention our next webinars. That we're going to have talk about dedicated stable teams on March 16th, and that's already on the website. You can sign up for that if you'd like to. I would love to hear, send us an email. I would love to hear your ideas about future webinars. So I do want to say that. Now, if you've got a moment, we're over time, but if you do have a moment, so I say, was this helpful, but maybe I should say, how helpful was this? So if you can make a quick comment about that. And then was there a particular slide or thought or idea, whatever you want to call it, that you found particularly useful? So if you have a moment to comment in the chat window about that, I would appreciate that. And others might also go, ooh, maybe I'll pay more attention to that idea. So if there's one idea or something about it that was particularly helpful, or one particular idea, then if you could mention that in the chat window, please do that. And I'll just, in closing, say, I'm going to put the slide deck up on the blog. So the slide deck will be available to you. We will also take the video and the audio and make that available to you on YouTube for you and or your colleagues. So that would be available to you. Okay, did anybody have a chance to put some things up there?
Yeah, I added a comment.
Yes, Kim. Oh, yes, you did add a comment. I see. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we should call it a day. We're overtime. Some of you need to go, and as do I, in fact. But thank you very much. I hope to see you at a later one. We'll try to get these scheduled out further in advance so you can kind of plan them a little bit better, you and possibly your colleagues. But thanks very much. I enjoyed it. Talk to you later.
Thanks, Joe.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Joe.
Bye.